Cordia August Fáilte Road. Welcome to my story with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary and Deal Animal Rescue. Now, my truly, truly wonderful guest today has an amazing story. Bernd Wollschlaeger is the son of a senior Nazi who was personally awarded the Iron Cross by Adolf Hitler. What makes Bernd's story even more surprising and astonishing is that he's a Jewish convert who served in the Israeli military after a remarkable journey of discovery. Welcome, Bernd.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. You already gave the introduction, so I can go straight to the questions, or
yes. I mean, I don't.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It's just such an astonishing story. I mean, when I heard it, I just thought, wow, it's something that actually makes you stand up at the irony of it. Growing up, the son of. Tell me about your early life, Bernd.
All right. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I cannot even come close to the Irish accent. My accent is a mishmash between German, American, German, and American language, not English, but I grew up with Americans on the basis, played a lot around. And the mishmash, as you call it in the English spoken in Israel. So my pronunciation may be sometimes off, but I hope you understand.
It sounds beautiful. I was born
my story, Mary, began with the time and place I was born in and born at. I was born May the 9th, 1958, in a gorgeous city called Bamberg. I'm not making any tourism advertisement here, but you should visit it. It's a medieval city about 1,000 years old, modeled after Rome. Each hill is crowned by a church, and in the center of the city is a massive cathedral. And so the sense of history was always present there. I mean, physically, they're present. We as children, I remember in elementary school, we had like this walking through the city day, something like that. And we had to describe what we saw, who was living where, what is the king and the prince. So literally going deep in history for a 7-8-year-old munchkin. But there was a little hole, which as a 7 or 8-year-old boy, of course I didn't understand, but something was off because we talked about the entire history, 1,000-year history. There was always a certain time of the history, this blip of the 12 years of Nazi dictatorship, but nobody talked about it.
Yeah, there was a whole gap, there was a whole period in history.
And again, I didn't know, I didn't know, I had no idea what that meant, but I knew there was something missing. Now, we know, and I knew as children, that there was a war we knew took place. And in the war, people win and people lose, I thought. And when the Americans sent 10,000 to 15,000 American soldiers and family members living in the city, obviously, we didn't win that war. I figured that out.
Yes.
And then when knowing about the war, I approached my parents who never talked about it. They actually dismissed it. We're moving forward and don't look back. Nur vorwärts, niemand schaue zurück.
Yeah.
And that was strange. And I knew the war had a massive impact on our family because when I asked about my grandparents, I was taught they're not there. They're gone. And this kind of losing this dark hole, this black hole of history that I grew up with until I found out that there was much more than a hole. It's not a faux pas. It was intentionally kept close.
You were the only boy, and you had you still have two sisters, if I'm correct.
Well, I had two sisters. My older sister, Krista, she was 10 years younger than I am, died, and I had the privilege to be at her bedside, at least coming from America. And my younger sister, Helga, she's living 3 years younger. She's living still in Bamberg, living in the same area where I grew up in. So we have some kind of contact. I never had any uncles or aunts because whenever I asked about that, I was told they're gone.
And no explanation whatsoever.
Well, no explanation at all. There was a war. The war was terrible, and people died. Now, slowly but surely, because I was a nutnik, and I'm still a nutnik, insisting to understand what's going on, curious. I think that would be the best term, sakranut in Hebrew. I asked questions, And finally, my father and my mother, when confronted with these questions, benign questions, who is my grandfather, who's my grandparents, they found it prudent, and I thought it was way out too late already, but they found it prudent to explain to me what happened. And I heard two different stories about that war.
Yeah.
That my father glorified it as the most beautiful experience in his life, the battle hero, the actually the elite tank unit he had belonged to, and serving under the command of General Guderian, the father of the German Blitzkrieg. And serving under that, he literally was physically the first in the pushed in towards Poland in September 1939. Later on, the next year, pushed into in France, Netherlands, Belgium. And then in July the 10th, I think, the Operation Barbarossa in 1941, the attack on the former Soviet Union in the late summer, which really was a problem. And my father's tanks were the first to move the furthest forward towards Moscow, conquering by a fluke a city called Orel. And for that accomplishment, my father was awarded the Knight's Cross by a man whom he still adoringly referred to as his Führer, Adolf Hitler. I had no idea who Adolf Hitler was. Not that I was actively disconnecting from that part of Hitler, but I didn't know who Hitler was. I just knew my father was a hero, adored by his friends who came to our house once a year to celebrate the good old times. And they referred to him as Arturo. His middle name was His first name was Arthur. And looked at me and said, "You have to be proud of your father. He was the hero of the heroes." So obviously my father is a hero, and I would adore him as the knight in shining armor. Now, my mother had a completely different backstory, the story of horror, not of glory. She belonged to an ethnic German minority in Czechoslovakia, wealthy family. She was the only child, had a beautiful villa that her father belonged to, had built a beautiful villa as he was a merchant, and everything lost as a result of the war. Barely they crossed the border from Czechoslovakia to Germany, the Sudetenland it was called, and everything left behind. Nothing could be rescued. In the wake of the flight, my grandparents died, and my maternal grandparents and my paternal grandparents died in the war too. So horrific story, but nobody actually talked about more detail about it. But just to FYI, that you know that.
But you know, it's understandable, Bernd. You were 8 years of age, 9 years of age. In those days, parents certainly wouldn't talk in front of their children about anything, even about mundane matters. I know my parents would tell me to leave the room if an adult came in and started talking. So I can understand that you wouldn't have been aware, but there was something deep down telling you that there was a gap. And teachers in your school started to tell you what was going on, and your father dismissed what they were telling and saying basically that they were communists and that what they were telling were lies.
You're absolutely correct. First of all, 1972, I was 14 years old. We started to talk slowly about the past, which was a following notion. Hitler came to power in January 1933, elected and appointed by a party that had barely than the majority in the Knesset, would say, in his parliament. Hitler destroyed Germany by imprisoning, turning a fragile Weimar Republic democracy into a dictatorship. People disappeared when they didn't agree with Hitler. Hitler triggered the Second World War, and in Germany lost 50 million people perished in the World War, among them millions of civilians called Jews. And then huff and puff on the 8th of May 1945, the German army finally resigned after Hitler, actually a week before, committed suicide. And huff and puff, like the Huns invading and then leaving our town, and everything is hunky-dory, we're moving forward. That was kind of the notion. And that was shattered by an event that took place in Munich, 1972.
Yeah.
Prior to that.
That was a changing point for you, wasn't it, Bernd?
Well, prior to that, that's correct. That's correct, Mary. But prior to that, there was an event that preceded this event in 1972. And that was the election of a prime minister, Willy Brandt, who was the first post-war German prime minister who did not belong to the Nazi party. He was a socialist. He had to escape Germany in 1933, returned to Germany in 1946, rebuilt the Social Democratic Party, and rose to power in 1969, defeating a chancellor whose name was Kurt Georg Kiesinger, who was not only a Nazi as a party member, he was actively involved in the action of the Ministry of Justice to rewrite the Nuremberg laws. So, and the tremendous impact that our Chancellor Willy Brandt had, because he traveled in December 1970, he traveled to Poland, and in front of the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial in a cold December day, he sank on his knees, bowed his head, and asked for forgiveness. My father was livid. It was crazy.
Yeah, because it brought everything back. And your father, from what I've been reading, your father had a drink problem. He drank quite heavily, and one would think that through drink he was able to try and block out. The more he drank, the more he was trying to block out in some subliminal way what he was responsible for.
It could be, Mary. I mean, he was a drunkard, but motivation to be a drunkard, to drown in alcohol, not to think about it, that was not him. He was a very intellectual man. He actually made me read the newspaper, even until today, page by page with him, and give a report. So he was eager to impress upon me that he not only was the hero, but he was a dedicated father. Now, there were, in addition to that problem of drinking, but that will come later, that one thing was unique in our house in Bamberg. It was a large patrician-style 19th century Bauhaus building. We rented an apartment, our family rented an apartment downstairs, and upstairs the landlady lived, and my mother told me never talk to the landlady. She's a noble woman. Speak only or answer only if spoken to. And in the hallway, right next to the entrance to our apartment, was a picture mounted, a painting mounted on the wall, depicting an officer in uniform, German officer's cap, Knight's Cross, looking like my father when I saw pictures of him, of course, different facial features. And when I asked my father only once who this man was, and my father referred to him as a traitor, and I should not ask him any questions anymore. This traitor was Count Klaus von Stauffenberg, who the German colonel who led the assassination attempt of Adolf Hitler on the 20th of July, 1944.
He lived above you.
He was dead already. I mean, he was executed. His wife, Nina von Stauffenberg, lived upstairs after surviving the concentration camps, and she lived there. And that was the irony of history, because from her, I heard a different story.
She, through every time you used to see her, and you played with her children, and you saw grandchildren. You saw a different side of a woman and a family, a loving family that was not being, or that your father wasn't presenting to you. But, which is, it's important that people actually judge people for the way they are to them. And she was lovely to you, and you were able to say to yourself, what my father is saying doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. These are lovely people, and they're kind. But I posted on Facebook that you were coming on, and I said to you before the interview, the astonishing amount of people have been sending me their emails for me to forward the interview. One man took issue with the fact when I said that your father was a member of Wehrmacht, the Nazi party. He said that he wasn't a Nazi, and because he was in the Wehrmacht, and there were lots of people in the Wehrmacht who were against Adolf Hitler, and I said I was going to put that question to you. According to Mail Online, your father was a Nazi, and
I respectfully disagree with the letter writer, and would like to educate him, inform him what I found out about my father. Number one, my father, when he came from a large Prussian family, born and raised in Mark Brandenburg, outside Berlin, the typical equivalent of the Prussian German. He had 10 brothers and sisters, all of them except 2 perished in the war. And he himself, because of financial reasons of the family, they were not rich, was sent to the boarding school of the National Socialist Party called the NAPOLA, National Political Academy of Nazi Germany. That was kind of the West Point of the Nazis. So if he didn't say that he was not a Nazi, he sucked in with the mother's milk and Nazism, and was there. It was a very cruel education.
Yeah.
So he was a lieutenant colonel. The highest rank was a major lieutenant colonel in the Wehrmacht, tank commander. But I found out through after good services of a very brave man who did in the years and years prior to the opening of the archives in the East, he opened other archives which are difficult to open, like in the East Germany.
Yeah.
And there were two cases of evidence against my father. Number one, a picture of him sitting next to Heinrich Himmler,
Heinrich Himmler,
1940, head of the SS,
yeah.
in 1942 in the East. When German officers, when the Wehrmacht meet the head of the beast, the SS, it was not about tank tactics. This was about how the Wehrmacht can control areas of kill zones.
Yeah.
Second piece of evidence, which I found also after his death, there's a letter that my father signed as a commanding officer to transfer the Russian prisoners, this large amount of Russian prisoners, to a place called Auschwitz-Birkenau for final treatment and neutralization. You know what that means?
Oh God, unfortunately, yes.
The last point, also that I got from the different sources, never from my father, that my father was, it's hard to say that, but I was approached by in a conference that I gave in Bamberg 4 or 5 years ago, Bamberg, Germany, and a military, military historian approached me and had this metal suitcase or attaché suitcase, a little bit old style. He opened it and said, "This is what you need to understand." There were torn pieces of Torah scroll, torn. And what they symbolize, and I asked him, was when my father's tanks ripped into Russian or Polish villages, they first of all killed everybody, walking or not walking, Jews or not through, but they tore out the burning synagogues, the Torah scrolls, soaked them in water and used them as insulation material for the German tanks in the cold Russian winter. And my father told me that was great insulation material. He knew exactly what he was doing. If that is not a Nazi, then what?
No, I agree 100%. It was just I was picked up on it, and I was told, you're wrong on that. And I said, well, I'll put it to Dr. Bernd Wollschlaeger. When
I can stand corrected anytime, Mary.
He was a lovely.
You can ask if you want to get more information. I will be happy to convey that.
Yeah, I said I'll ask Dr. Wollschlaeger when I'm speaking to him. But I said, the article is. I was reading the Mail online, and there was a big article about you and about your dad and about your life and everything, and he was referring to that article, and so I said, well, to put this matter to bed, I'll be speaking to Dr. Wollschlaeger and find out, have I misinterpreted it in any way, but which I hadn't, thank God. But what was I going to say? At what stage did life change for you?
Age of 14, the Olympic Games in Munich 1972. That was an event that we literally prepared as a West Germany. In West Germany, and East Germany on the other side, of course, divided by the wall. The Iron Curtain came down after the war. But West Germany was tasked was granted to provide the financial and logistical support to let the Olympics to get into Munich, that the Olympics will take place in Munich. And that was a complete stark difference from the Olympics in 1936 that Adolf Hitler abused for propaganda purposes, in the Olympics from 1972, which were opened by the same prime minister who had a tremendous moral standing in the Western world, Willy Brandt. And I remember my parents invited friends to our house. I had to call them uncle and aunt, and knew that these were not my uncles and my aunts. And whenever the teams parade, first TV, black and white though, and they watched the teams parading to the stadium, whenever they appeared on the screen, my parents and their friends were applauding, hooray, hurrah. And then suddenly a team appeared on the screen, carrying a flag, of course, the Israeli team. And everybody felt silent. I knew as a child, it's the do not ask the question moment. Excuse my English, shut up from now on, because there's something wrong. But I didn't know what. And 10 days later, this brave Israeli team that paraded in the Munich stadium on this beautiful summer day in August 1972
it was awful.
Was brutally attacked, and initially at the first encounter, 2 Israelis shot and butchered. I have to say that I know, and that also sources, that the East German Stasi, the State Security Service, occupied a building on one side that looked into these Cornelistrasse building where the Israelis were, and they gave logistical and material support to the terrorists. We know that now. Unfortunately, the German government was negotiating as best as they could. Personally, the Minister of Interior, the Genscher, negotiated with the terrorist leader, Issa, and Issa demanded he will not accept the proposal to take German politicians as hostages. He wanted to be flown out with his entire team from a military airport nearby Munich to an Arab country of their choice, and in a great international world spectacle, Israel should have released 260 or 270 Arab prisoners from the Israeli prisons. On the other hand, the Israelis would be released, the Israeli athletes, and that didn't happen. The turning point was denied.
What made that even worse, if there's anything that can make it worse, is that this was happening again to Jews on German soil. And I suppose for people who weren't involved in the war, people, ordinary, everyday, say Germans who were not complicit in any way, this must have been hell on earth being revisited on their country. But for your father, he blamed the Jews.
Yeah, it is a very good point that you're making. What happened, of course, before he blamed it, there was the helicopters of the German army, 2 of them, landed behind the closed gates of the military airport, first in Fellbruck. I remember everything detail. I such a post-traumatic stressism. I can sometimes wake up and see it.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
The 2 helicopters landed behind the closed gates. The military support of the Mossad Kidon unit, special forces of the Israeli Mossad, were on the ground, together with Tzvi, I think Tzvi, his first name was the head of the Mossad at that time, who begged the Germans, do not open fire, do not shoot at them. These are highly skilled, highly trained terrorists. Let us do it. The Germans denied it, their request, and German police with poorly designed sniper rifles opened fire on the terrorists. The terrorists knew that this is a trap. The airplane was there, but no pilots. And Issa threw a hand grenade in one helicopter, which exploded with the Israelis sitting in the helicopter, burning to death. And the other helicopter, they sprayed with machine gun fire, and everybody died. The next day, a huge article in the German newspaper, printed on every news outlet throughout Germany. 2 tanks, 2 helicopters on the tarmac. One burned out with the charred remains of the Israelis inside. The other helicopter with the bodies of the Israelis slumped over the seats. And a huge headline: Jews killed in Germany again. I speak German, I know German, but
it was your mother tongue.
Again, what does it mean? That means something similar happened in the past. So when I asked my father what happened,
yes. The use of the word again. Yeah.
Yes, and when I asked my father, in school we talked after the Holocaust, after what happened in München. My father looked at me, nicht mehr die Juden, not the Jews again. Look what they do to our country. So the perpetrator is victims and the victims as perpetrators, at least linguistic wise.
It's a twisted belief system.
And
you wonder what happened to people like, with respect, Bernd, to people like your father, and who would abdicate so much of their humanity and and themselves, if you like, to a group of people, a higher power, if you like, the likes of Eichmann and Göring and Himmler and Adolf, and Hitler. What was it about this wonderful nation of intelligentsia, literary people who, medical people, intelligent people, who suddenly just gave all of that away, and above all gave their humanity away? What is it?
Mary, this is a wonderful, very important question, but I have to give you the answer in a sense that reflects my certain frustration. Nazism hasn't died. Nazism,
no.
Hatred of Jews and other minorities was nothing new. What happened in Germany, that we described as the modern nation, of the world, is that the weak and fragile Weimar Republic imploded, and people looking for a strong leader. Unfortunately, and I'm not trying to diminish what happens in Germany, I'm not trying to put in the white coat around what happened. Unfortunately, this is something that happens today. There's people thriving when they get a leader that they can lead them. I mean, in this case, it was he led Germany over the abyss and committed suicide. But the fact is, Nazism is alive and well, always was, always will, and now is pushing through in very ugly-faced, multiple-headed monster, a hydra. And we're seeing it again right now. It's not typical, and again, it's not typically German, it's not typically Nazi, it's typically human behavior which need to be addressed. And we're living in a time where tribalism is ripe. Tribalism in the sense that everybody just wants to belong to his or her group, no outside criticism, nothing allowed. Sitting in an echo chamber where the news are being brought to them what they want to, not what they should to. And this is where General Hayden, the former head of the CIA and the National Security Council, unfortunately suffered a stroke a few years ago, clearly described the situation. We're living in a post-truth, pre-fascism era. I would moderate it a little bit. We're living in a way post-truth, pre-fascism, pre-authoritarian rule environment. Now, I'm not trying to drag you into this mud wrestling about politics.
Yeah.
It has not changed the mechanism, and they have never changed at all. But it happens first with words. If words of hatred are less to prevail, and because nobody responds to them, they fall on the fertile ground, the mind of others, and sprout into deeds. If these deeds prevail, people do it over and over again, then characters will form. And if these characters dominate the social system,
but you know, people talk about the Holocaust, and they talk about the gas chambers and the death camps and Action T4 and all of that. But what people don't realize is that the Holocaust didn't start in a vacuum. It didn't start with the death camps. It didn't start with medical experiments or with one person being pitted against another. It started with silence. It started with people watching as their neighbors vanished into thin air and not asking the question, where are they? When are they coming back? Why has their house been taken over? Why are there new family inside in their home? What's happening? Nothing was asked. And, and it's happening today because people don't watch out for each other and don't speak up. And I think the worst crime of the lot is, two, reticence and silence. And I'm with the Abraham Global Peace Initiative, and I'm the chair of Ireland and the UK. And we're trying to fight using the Holocaust. It's a Canadian organization set up by Avi Ben Lolo. He's an Israeli Jew living in America. But we're trying to use the Holocaust as a way of looking at all hate and how we can avoid this ever happening again to any other nationality, whether it's Jew or Christian or whatever. What we can learn from the Holocaust that will teach us to stand up and not be a bystander in situations.
Again, Mary, here comes the point. Are people willing, and not only willing, but are they able to listen, taking the cottons out of the ear and put it in their mouth and listen and talk? It ain't happening. It's tribalism, two groups. And I heard from a very wise rabbi, something I never forget. He said, what happened is that people were first de-individualized. This is not Mary and Bernard. This is Abraham and Sarah, period.
Yeah.
Then secondly, can be dehumanization. They're not people. They're just this big nose Jews who knows in our business and eat well, in Egypt is still propagated, make matzah out of blood of the Christian or Arab children. And then comes the demonization that these people, quote unquote, are not worthwhile living, and therefore it's good to expunge them. My father reflected that sentiment. I remember when I came after multiple conversations which went nowhere, to the point where my father literally tacheles said it. I don't understand, Bernd, why your generation is so weak. I don't understand the world that they're so weak. We as Germans did the world a huge favor to take care of this dirt, lichluch. And that can happen anywhere. And I'm not trying to be too hot politics. When you call a person an Arab or a Jew, you're using language as de-individualized.
You're taking the humanity away from them. But there's a book by Helga Schneider. She was 4 when she was abandoned by her mother, Trudy Schneider, who went to work with Mengele. And she enlisted with Mengele, and she left Helga looking after her 2-year-old brother until their grandmother could come and take them. 32 years later, it took for the two women to meet in a nursing home. And she said to her, why could you kill babies, Mama? They were just like me and Peter. She said, they were nothing like you and Peter. My children, as if she wasn't in the room, my children were Aryan, my children were perfect. The world had to rid itself of that repugnant race. And those babies would have grown into repugnant Jews. And that was her. And she actually, to the bitter end, she remained stoic and proud to be a follower of Mein Führer.
Well, if I take a step back, Mary, in the time, yes, that they served, I would take the term served or lived in it, and were part of the system, I can understand it. But 60 or 70 or 80 years after an historical, catastrophic, cataclysmic event, still to love his or her Führer, there's some serious paranoid delusion going on. I can say that as a physician. But that is an issue that's the reason why I'm talking. I'm not talking to sell something, to be a book star or get my movie. And I actually started very simple. My son asked me a simple question when he was 15. Now he's 32. He asked me a simple question. Abba mir Sabashele, Father, who is my grandfather. And I didn't know how to answer him.
Yeah.
But he gave me the insight and said, I need to do something. And I didn't want to tell him on the one hand, yours truly, that's me, his father is a Jew, is an Israeli, and was serving in a combat unit in the Israeli army. And on the other hand, my father, his grandfather, was a highly decorated World War II German tank commander and was a Nazi. I couldn't reconcile it, and I couldn't talk to my parents about it. So during the time that I'm speaking and began speaking in 2007, I wanted to involve them. And we developed a far closer relationship than ever before. I was divorced. I didn't grow up with my children in this sense, but my ex-wife, let me see them as often as they could. And I think I used this precious time to listen to them what they want. And I told them the story because it's part of their life.
When you were post, if you like, the atrocity at the Olympics in 1972, you started to ask questions, and one of your teachers told you what was going on. And as I say, your dad said they were communists and the Holocaust didn't happen. Then you turned to a Jesuit priest, and he introduced you to Jewish or an Israeli Arab and Jewish community to try, who were all working together. Was that became, I presume that became the seed that was sown within you for your conversion at that point? You know, some people might actually ask, did you feel that in some way, did you feel unjustifiably that there was a guilt on all the generations, and was your conversion out of, say, sorrow for what your father had done? Were you leaning towards that? Or, what was it about Judaism that actually drew you in? So much so that at one stage you said you knew that this was my family of choice, and I was no longer a German. I was now.
Well, that's a complex question and comments. My teacher was a Jesuit priest, but he left the priesthood because he didn't agree with the rigid form of Catholicism. Yeah. Even though Jesuit priests are not known to be too radical left, not too radical right, they are more or less in a progressive camp.
Yeah.
Anyway, he told me, look, Bernd, the only way as a Catholic that you can deal with that, I told him my story, is to make amends. I said, amends to whom? To those who were harmed. I said, I don't know anybody who is Jewish. I grew up with an Orthodox Catholic, therefore my close relationship to him. I grew up as a Catholic, conservative Catholic. My mother sent me to primary, actually to kindergarten, Catholic kindergarten, Catholic school, and then to church to be an altar boy. She wanted me to become a priest. That didn't work out, obviously. But I was knew enough that there's religion, there's no religion. And I knew what it means. And he said, look, I can bring you together with a group of Israelis, Jews and Arabs alike, that we in the church organize to come once a year or every other year to Germany and then communicate with each other, find an opportunity to communicate. And this group I joined as a German participant, and I fell in love with an Israeli girl. So again, I'm not only spiritually motivated what I was doing. So I have the full disclosure. And she said, look, if you want to make something out of our friendship relationship, you have to come to Israel. Tacheles. So I said, I will do it. But as a big Schwitzer, I should have known that you need money and more than passport. So I got my first passport, got some money from summer jobs. I hitchhiked in Munich, do not recommend it, and crossed the Alps by train to the port city of Ancona in Italy. From there, we boarded the ship, slept on deck, definitely not a cruise ship, and stopped in Piraeus for repositioning.
I hate boats. It
was before Google, Schmoogle, and all that stuff. And I texted her that I will that time in Israel. When I arrived in Israel, I had very mixed feelings. First of all, I disembarked from a boat and set my foot on the ground in my name, Wollschlaeger, knowing what my father did. Maybe somebody will recognize me, and that's the end of it. But on the other side of the meches, of the customs, was she waiting for me, and she took me to her parents' house in Neve Sha'anan, in the hills of working class in neighborhood. And her parents were waiting outside as if I have the long lost son, picking up my rucksack and my bag, chit-chatting something to me. I have no idea what it was Yiddish. Transferred me, brought me into the house, and there was one bedroom and one kitchen. And they made the living room available for me, bed living room, and they squeezed in one room. That was the amazing part of hospitality. And the first dinner that we had, her father looked at me and said, in clear German, I know you have problems understanding us, therefore I want to speak in German. I asked him naively, how did you learn German? And he showed me the number tattooed in his forearm. He said, ich war in den Lagern. I was in the camps. And I thought, I'm singing in the ground. I was a young German sitting in the home of a Holocaust survivor in Israel. I thought I would drown here. He took my hand and said, you need to come with me to a place that you explain what you need to know. Because
you went to Yad Vashem.
We went to Yad Vashem, and he walked through the Yad Vashem, where a Jewish victim of the Holocaust takes me by his hands and walks me through the exhibit, discussing every point into the detail.
I've never seen it. I've never been to Israel, but I have a friend who has been to Yad Vashem, and they said, it left them breathless, left them totally. They actually couldn't finish it. They had to sit outside. It was.
Well, I left emotionally. I was crying.
Yeah.
And I asked myself, how can these people, in a polite way, these people, the Jews, rebuild their lives, rebuild their
they're an extraordinary people.
Horrendous victims that victimized so much life lost. How can they continue? And they must be special. And I started to, when I came back to Germany, to seek out Jews. Now, Germany in 1979 was a war zone.
Yeah.
There were about a mile of radical left-wing German terror groups.
I remember them. I remember because in 1982, I was in Bavaria dancing. I was a professional dancer, and there was signs all over with Baader Meinhof photographs. And
they were going after Jews too, by the way. In Tebbe, as I shown, one of the terrorists, Böse is his name, bad man, hijacked the plane to Uganda and separated the Jews from the non-Jews. Mm. So I asked myself, if there's a special, I want to find out about them. And with my luck, I approached the Jewish community in Bamberg. They had a Stiebelech, 30 people. And the entrance of the synagogue was in the part of the backyard, and the door was just written on it, Israelitische Kultusgemeinde, Israelite cultural community. And when I knocked at the door, an old man opened the door, looking at me, was willst du? And I must have rambled something, because he allowed me to get into the hallway. He said, come on. He probably thought I'm another student, has to write a project. And remember, we're going to this dark corridor, lit by a red light in the corner, and the walls covered with black granite plates, and each granite plate engraved dozens of names. And I asked him, what does it mean? He said, you don't know? These were the names of those who didn't return from Theresienstadt. And the light is the Ner Tamid, the eternal light. And he took me under his wing, so to say, after a tough test. He said, look, you want me to teach you because you read everything? Be aware that nothing is free. You be my Shabbos goy, and in return, I will teach you. And
sorry for interrupting you. A Shabbos goy is
a non-Jew.
A Shabbos goy is a non-Jew who'll help around.
Serves the community on Shabbos, but Orthodox Jews cannot do light and work. And so the close, it was literally, I came there every Friday, and he told me, look, when you go there, be aware the little Stiebelach is our only home away from home. And so they will not, the alte Kackers, he said, that's what he said, they will not like you too much to be sitting there and watching them. So when I finished all my deeds that I had to do, coffee, bread, and finish the soup and the gefilte fish, which, by the way, I will never eat again after I learned how to do it.
Doesn't sound great.
I came every Friday, every Saturday, week by week, month to month, year by year. And the closer I came to this community of choice, the more I distanced myself from my community of origin. And I decided to live in a different world versus my family. That came to a blow up, a final total blow up in when my father demanded Christmas time. I was supposed to be together with my family in Christmas. Orthodox Christians, Orthodox Catholics go to Dome, go to the night mass, coming back, having symbolic dinner with lentil soup and carb, and be waiting for the children for my father's permission with the bell to open the door.
He always wore his
exactly. He wore next to the beautiful Christmas tree with beautiful candles. He stood with his dark suit with a cross around his neck, the Knight's Cross. When I came back the next day, hell broke loose, and I said, "Look, I don't give a damn how you feel about me, but I will not sit at the same table together with you, this blood-stained piece of metal, and then expect me to celebrate with you the birth of Christ. This is this is hypocrisy." And my father looked at me and said, "Raus, get out." There was a little problem. I didn't have much kesef or money. And the community never supported me because I never asked. And Itzhak must have noticed that something, Itzhak Rosenberg, the chair of the community, my quasi-father, he must have noticed that something is wrong, because suddenly we must have told somebody, suddenly a member of the community who never talked to me in 5 years, in the 5 years that I was there, his name was Aaron, he looked at me, "Du bist der Goy." That's correct. "Dein Name is Bernd." That's correct. "Hör mal zu, listen, deine Jacke schmutzig, deine Schuhe sind schmutzig." It was, of course, dirty jacket, dirty shoes I didn't wear. Here 100 marks, kauf dir neue Sachen, buy new stuff. So I was insulted and I was given money. I walked to Itzhak's office and said, "Itzhak, Aaron gave me 100 mark," and Itzhak looked at me. "He gave you 100 mark? He is stingy. He asked you 200 maybe, that last."
Yeah, that's what I actually read that, and I thought it was so funny. You must have asked him he gave you 100, you must have asked him for 2.
Well, unfortunately, Itzhak knew more about him than I knew about Aaron. He said, "Look, Aaron is somebody, we can only place him in Auschwitz in 1944, 1945, because nobody came out of his family. The Red Cross confirmed he's the only survivor." And Aaron and me became friends in a short period of time, for the 6 months that he lived. And he told me the most horrific stories about the Holocaust that I just still gives me I have to cry. He was a member of a Sonderkommando.
Yeah, the Sonderkommando were,
guiding Jews into the chamber, giving him a card, said, "Pick up your clothing, or you can only pick up when you have this identification card." And of course, they did the ultimate horrendous crime to let the Jews go into their brother and sister go in the gas chamber. And he told me what happened then with the Cyclone B was not fast. It took 20 to 30 minutes. And when he opened the gates to the hell, they, with gas mask on, the Sonderkommando, they pulled out the bodies, burned them, crushed the bones, and threw them in the killing fields of Auschwitz. And for that, they began 90-day relief, women, wine, alcohol, food. And then the next group, he survived. And when he died, I was asked to say Kiddush at his graveside, Kaddish at his graveside.
Now, for people who don't know what the Kaddish,
prayer for the dead.
It's a prayer for the dead. And
in Aramaic, not in Hebrew.
Yeah, Aramaic. Recently I heard the Our Father sung in Aramaic in Georgia, and it's just the most extraordinary language, and the most extraordinary. For you having come from a Catholic background, that you'll appreciate the similarities we all have. It sounded almost like Gregorian chanting, and I suppose the call to prayer in Arabic, and the Jewish music to our ears. You know, it's all that chanting that without music, and it's just wonderful, the Aramaic. And
well, I responded to the request to say the Kaddish, but tell him, Itzhak, I cannot do it. I'm not a Jew. He said, "You're one of us. Here, take the book." And I read it, and I knew I crossed the line now. That was crossing the line. And I asked Itzhak, I want to become a Jew. Itzhak said, "Look, you forgot what that means. Why do you want to be a ger tzedek, a righteous person? But you don't have to get this pain that we had to carry." I said, "I want to." I said, "Look, as your quasi father and real friend, I want to tell you one thing. I would send you to a rabbi in Frankfurt. He will clean you up. He will wash your brain, and because they give you the money to stay in a hotel, stay as long as you want." And the rabbi told me, look, in Frankfurt, said, "Look, my good friend Itzhak told me about your unique case." And I told my story. Said, "Look, I will teach you, but I will not convert you." And every time I met him, he was, over the course of 2 years, I asked him until he finally gave up in March of 1986 and told me, "I will send you to a rabbinical court. We'll convene in 6 months. I no guarantee that it will pass, but there's a guarantee that you have to do some things before you get there. One is a little plastic surgery. Don't want to talk about it. And it had to be in an Orthodox facility in Switzerland. There was a mohel in Munich, but he was known as a drunk with a slight unsteady hand, not Mike Bag. So I went to the professional butcher. He was a wonderful man. And then 6 months later, I think 4 or 5 months later, I had to present myself to the Hasidic community in Metz and were performing in a kosher mikveh, the immersion. When I came back to Germany, I went to halachic conversion in 1986 in December. And I remember when the chief rabbi was the only holdout and looked at me. They were sitting on the podium, dark suits, dark robes, dark hat. He said, "Young man, I know you did it out of guilt, and I know you did it then under conviction. I know that you want to become a Jew to do something active, but that's not enough to be a Jew."
That's why I asked you that question earlier on, not because I thought that that's what happened, but I suppose I'm being devil's advocate and asking you what others might think, like he did. Are you doing it because you're trying to make amends for your father's actions and people like him? But of course, you know, it's obvious just to listen to all the YouTube videos I've listened about you. I think you might think I'm stalking you now at this stage, but
what is YouTube? I'm just kidding.
YouTube. But looking at all of them, it's clear that you were completely taken with this, and this was to be your direction in life.
Well, he asked me when he read the conversion certificate in Hebrew and then in German. He asked me, "Do you know your name?" I said, "Yes." "But your Hebrew name, did you choose it?" "Ben Abraham is the name you have to take, but the first name." I said, "I don't know. What is your first name?" I said, "Bernd." "Do you know what it means?" "The bear slayer." "So we dove. It's free. Take it." And he broke the ice and said, "What do you want to do now?" I said, "I want to go to Israel." I said, "Why?" "I'm a young physician. I've just graduated from medical school. I cannot give anything symbolically, but I have to learn more. On the other hand, I have nothing to give to Israel but my life." And what I did, I applied for the visa according to the Holocausto, the conversion law in Israel. I was granted within 30 days. I got a ticket by the Jewish agency and the Israeli embassy in Bonn to fly from Frankfurt to Tel Aviv, a one-way flight. That was on January the 7th, 1987. And Itzhak asked me the day before, "Did you say goodbye to your parents?" I said, "I don't want
I'd like to have been a fly on the wall of your parents' house.
Because you chose our religion demands, your religion demands, the respect for father and mother, even though you don't want to." And I tried to say goodbye to my parents. My father was yelling and screaming. My mother was crying. And I left for Israel, joined the kibbutz. Actually, it came in the evening in Israel. I arrived there in the old airport of Ben Gurion. And there was the Olam HaOlim, just a big hall. And in the end, it was about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. There was a Pakita Burkhardt sitting behind glass, looking at my papers. I was the only one who said, "Dati or Chiloni, religious or secular?" I said, "What does it mean?" "Well, do you have money to go to a kibbutz or to the yeshiva or to the ulpan, or do you or have to send you to kibbutz?" I had no idea what that meant. And he said, well, kibbutz, because I don't have money. So I went 6 months in the kibbutz, learned Hebrew during the day, worked my hours off in order to learn Hebrew. It was then referred to the Ichirov hospital, which is now a huge replacement there in Tel Aviv. I did my stage, my returning internship. And then a month later, after I finished, I was drafted into the Israeli army because I wanted to. And I remember during basic training and following basic training, it was October 1987 or 88. We were in the first year of the Intifada, the Arab uprising, which was in Ramallah. And Beit El, where I was stationed, was exactly in between Ramallah and the settlement. And nobody liked us, including the settlers. And our commanding officers, we were all in full battle gear. He looked at me and looked at the others, said, look, Chevre, this is your Rofeg Dodi, the doctor of the unit. His name is Wollschlaeger. Well, you have to change his name. And if you have any problem, call him Dr. W or Rofe, but he's the one. And who I was standing there was a lieutenant.
You must have been very nervous in case anybody would find out in the IDF that you were the son of a tank commandant.
Well, you hit a nail right on the head. I was petrified.
Yeah.
And I said, what happens if they find out that I'm a Nazi in drag, so to say? I cannot talk about it. I cannot talk about it. So what I did, this fatal mistake, I threw my life into this virtual closet, slammed the door, turned the key in the lock, and tried to throw the key away, which unfortunately was a mistake. And my son Tal, who was only the age of 15, found out about me through his father, what really happened, by asking, Dad, who is my grandfather? And I had to answer. And I got, in my luck, 3 or 4 weeks later, he had a family history day in school. All my children were outgrown there, but they were all in very religious institution of learning, tefillin in the morning, keeping kashrut, kosher, and so on. And my son was called and he said, my grandfather was a famous Nazi. I was not there. I was told by teachers. And the rabbi immediately called me in, and the principal of the school, and said, look, Dr. Wollschlaeger, your son Tal told us the verdrehte Geschichte that dein Vater, your father, was a Nazi. What's wrong with him? I said, look, it's not my son. It's my life. And I briefly described my life, and they looked at me. Did you ever want to talk about it? I said, no. The rabbi, a very burly big man, said, come with me. I said, here you talk to the children, and I want to hear it. And what happened, he probably predicted, that the weight was lifted off my shoulders.
That's the best thing that ever happened to you, is because it was a weight on top of you, an unnecessary weight, because they accepted you.
Well, I finally came to the truth, the conviction that I have to go back, my family of origin. And almost 15 years after I left, I go back with my son, went back to my son, and my parents are long gone, and visited my parents' gravesite, which is ironically, if you ever come to Bamberg,
right next to Jewish.
The central cemetery where Jews and non-Jews were buried together, separated by a wall, because there was such a close relationship. And my parents' gravesite is exactly one row parallel to the wall that separated the Jewish from the Christian cemetery. On the other side, I buried Yitzhak. Yitzhak was buried soon after, but Aaron. And on this side, my parents are resting. And I told my son, look, what we have to learn, that the darkness, we can only escape this absolute darkness, we can only escape by stepping out and looking back and saying, we learned what happened. We want to move forward with the conviction that it never should happen again. And I did what I did. I would never say that I converted because it is an inside thing. That's a beautiful thing. It's look what the guy can do. It was a very, very difficult process. Very difficult 7-year process of spiritual growth, which I appreciate that I had the opportunity, but I don't recommend it for anybody else, because it has to be a conviction for you. And actually, I met 2 others who did the same, but of a different motivation. But for me, I'm a proud Jew. My children are proud Jews. And I think that what I did, and I'm talking about it, is maybe to like a little bit of switching in the ear and said, look, do you listen to me? That's a story that you should learn, you should read about. But for me to motivate other people to listen and to understand, because it's not about me. It's not about me, what a cool guy I was or am. It's about what people can do if if you allow them to do it, meaning murder. But
Bernd,
what other people?
what did someone asked me actually? Actually, it was Toba Abramczyk, my friend from Toronto. She said to ask you, what did other friends, your own friends in school, your father's friends, your outside of your father and mother, and I know your mother saw herself and the German people and the Czechoslovakian Germans as being victims as well. And I know she had Alzheimer's towards the end of her life after your father died, and she visited you in Israel. And I know she looked at you and she said, "Oh, and you're like your father, a warrior," because you were dressed in the IDF uniform. And as you said, it was a way of kind of, I suppose, saying goodbye to your mother without there being any recrimination, because she wasn't at this stage compos mentis to understand a strict or a tough discussion like that. But what did other people think? What did your friends think? Did they embrace you? Did they reject you?
Well, I can give you a very clear answer because it happened in 1979 on German TV, with 3 channels. The series The Holocaust with Meryl Streep, the TV drama with Meryl Streep, it was screened, and millions and millions of Germans watched it and listened to it. Just in our house, my father said, Judenpropaganda wird hier nicht angeschaut. Jewish propaganda will not be watched. For the first time, there was an understanding that what happened in the Nazi dictatorship is something that we as Germans did and carried a responsibility, because it was committed and ordered by a democratically elected government. There's not a rogue group.
No. That's what made it so unique.
So when we discussed specifically during the Holocaust series, we discussed it heavily among us. I mean, students our same age, and there were several different reactions. On the one hand, somebody said, "Oh, that's too much. It cannot be true. I mean, that's just impossible. How can he murder 6 million people?" Totally flabbergasted, shamed that it actually affected the Germans. For me, for example, when the first time I went abroad, we hitchhiked, a friend of mine, from Germany to the border to France and then to the Côte d'Azur. And when we were asked where we're from, we said from Sweden, because he didn't want to say we come from Germany. So shame. And then others, they said, "Look, I know horrible things can happen, but what can I do to undo it? I cannot undo it. So it's horrible, but you never forget it." So there were different reactions, very different reaction, rarely anti-Semitic reaction, because we all knew what happened. And
rarely anti-Semitic.
Of course, if you're looking for anti-Semitic remarks, there are plenty, even now and in the future. But there was no anti-Semitic notion on the side of my parents, the uncles and aunts. They were more critical, because when I came for the first time back to Germany, my parents died. I was blamed with the fact, I was told, "Your parents died because of what you did." Actually, my father made it very clear when his funeral in June, he died on June the 1st, 1987.
He didn't want you back.
6 months, he made a clear mission to impress upon everybody that this person, i.e. his son, Bernd, yours truly, is not belong to our family, is not allowed to go to my gravesite, is not allowed to even call himself that name. Well, I went anyway, after years of this death. And his friends, I slowly, just 3 years ago, I approached my uncle, then my father, they asked me to call him. I approached him and he was very old already, and said, "Look, I don't forget you. I don't hate you, and I hope you don't hate me. I had to do what I had to do. And I will do it again if necessary. I don't hate Germany. I just had to do," and said, "I, as a young German, I can make a difference. And this difference is, if necessary, to give my life, but even not being a Jew, to fight in the Israeli army." That's what I did. I became a Jew, fought in Israeli, unfortunately, 2 wars or campaigns. And I asked myself, why do you put your life on the line? It is suicidal. Until one you remember my last Miluim in the reserve duty in September 1990, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in August. In August, and special units were called upon. Those with knowledge of chemical weapons, including me, were called upon to report, and we were in a, for God's sake, in a hole between Syria, Jordan, and Israel. Every night, Haligali on the other border, terrorists trying to come in. Jordanian forces called that they had it up to here with the terrorists. We were communicating with them. It was always a fight in the night. And one of the Miluhimnikim, we call him, he looked at me and said, "I heard some rumors, Doc, that you were not born as a Jew." I said, "Yeah." "You chose Judaism?" "Yeah." "That's pretty crazy." Then I heard to the grapevine that you came to Israel voluntarily. "Is it true?" I said, "Yeah." "That's uber crazy, voluntarily in that country. And then you volunteer to fight with us? You're one of us. You're totally nuts." And so I was never received, or barely received, a negative. I didn't walk around with the flag around. My father, the Nazi. No, they looked at me and said, "Oh, we have a lot of respect for you. If somebody can do that, I have a lot of respect." And that was instead, and I don't want to be that written on my graveyard, a lot of respect. I just want to tell people, one person can make a difference. If you want to,
well, that actually, with the Abraham Global Peace Initiative, we have a project, if you like, that we're hoping to try and get into schools, and we have a meeting actually tomorrow with one particular school and another one in March with the university, and it's called The Power of One. And it's basically, how one person can make a difference. It doesn't have to be an army, but it just takes one person at a time to make a difference. What I was struck with when I read was the fact that you said that your parents are buried in the shadows, if you like, of the Jewish people that they persecuted, and they're so close, and it is, they're eternally in the shadows now of the of the hate that they were responsible for. And it goes back to, again, I mean, as I say, I've been to Germany a few times, mostly Bavaria, Bayern, Geretsfried, Landsberg, all around there dancing and that. And I was struck by the cleanliness and the organization and the neatness and the people, how they were so, nice and that. But it was only years later that I got into Holocaust education, and halfway through my master's found out that there's, I was told my great-great-grandmother was Jewish, which always felt like there was something there on my shoulder urging me on, because, I mean, sometimes when you're reading about it, you don't think you can take any more. The more you read about what happened, Bernd, there were times when I felt I couldn't even sleep with what I was reading half the time. And
well, I can tell you, Mary, life is not made of black and white. There's shades of gray. And what I learned over the years, and specifically my service, that there are two worlds. There's one world of the civilization, and there's one world of primitive mass murder that is so hard to understand. I'm not blaming Arabs. I'm not talking anti-Arabic, but when you see how Christians and Coptic Christians are persecuted in Egypt and have to flee coming here, that is, or Christians, less attendance in Bethlehem, in the birthplace of Jesus, there are less and less Christians there either. So there's this, and then by the final exploration that I had a stint of a few weeks in the occupied Lebanon at that time, and we were fully armed, walking from village to village, mostly Sunni Shia villages that are devastated by Sunni units of the Lebanese army and by the Palestinian, the Christian army and the Jamila, Phalange, they were called. What they did is not killing people. They were butchering them, cutting off heads, putting it on a stick in front of the house, raping women, raping little children. And I asked myself, it's not about that all is bad here and all is good there, but war is never a solution to our problems.
No,
war is never
it's not.
Never be the tool for that.
Dialogue
we
is
as
the only
human,
thing that
yeah,
works.
we as human beings, let's say beings, not as Germans, but beings, are capable of the most beautiful expression of art and science. In one hand, on the
Is
other
it?
hand, you have
Yeah.
the darkest, bloodiest form of violence, and I experienced that. And what I learned is we have on a daily basis make every effort that when we hear a word of hatred to speak up against it. Tiny example, I don't want to burden your time. I had a student in my office, rotating with my office as a physician assistant. She was about 98 pounds, a little beautiful looking Pakistani girl with a traditional dress and a hijab on her head, a short hijab, the head dressing.
Yeah, the
And
hijab.
hijab, and we sent it to the room number one. There's a family that needs some care. I asked her, can you do the vitals and ask her history? She came out 2 minutes later and was crying. I said, what happened? I said, you should know fully, I'm a Jew, I'm an Israeli, and that I appreciate what she's doing in my office. She was very comfortable to talk to me. He said, they called me a dirty Muslim. I said, they did what? Dirty Muslim? I walked into with her and back into the room and said, and I knew this family very, very well. There was a husband, the wife, and two children. I said, did you just call her a dirty Muslim? Yeah, and we are actually appalled that you employ Muslims. So let me tell you one thing before I kick your elongated back out of here. This is not a hate zone. This is an absolute zero hate zone. We talk to each other, we are open, we are equal. And if you decide to use this malice and exhibit this malice in this beautiful, small, tiny woman, see it as an enemy, you must be out of your freaking mind. Oh, how can you be a Jew and talk like that? So I'm a Jew because I learned to be a Jew. And you can make choices as a Jew, and choices that are very important, and choices by how to deal with people.
Yeah, dialogue. I keep saying this, we're never going, no civilization is ever going to advance if war and weaponry becomes the only tools. The greatest tool to breaking down any barrier is dialogue. It's conversation. It's listening to somebody talking and hearing the other person. That's the most important thing, Bernd.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. And I know it's more difficult. I don't want to take your country or any country with Northern Ireland, but hatred and murder never solved the problem. I learned from a commanding officer. He was the commander of the Southern Command, and as young officers, he taught us and said, look, the more senior you find officers in the army, the less radical they get, because they have to answer and question, is that what I'm doing in military action has any outcome that is beneficial for us, or is even making the situation worse? Because after the war, you need to talk. This is not running away from the conflict. They're just making it much more difficult to justify war. And he said, Israelis are just running away from war. I can tell you, I was in combat. This is the scariest thing I ever did. And I knew that there are two ways to get out of it, and most of them are bad.
Yeah.
So I understand that, and afterwards somebody has to clean up the mess, and then you have to talk anyway. You have more.
This is it. You
like
could start it.
Cycle.
Yeah.
The courage is like in the Good Friday Accords by Senator Mitchell.
Yeah, that's right.
The goal is not to have more conflict, but to de-escalate, because you have to talk, and eventually you have to talk. And
that's why Ireland really succeeded when it actually had the likes of, say, Senator Mitchell and Mo Mowlam and John Hume and all of Jerry Adams, Martin McGuinness, all of them sitting down together, people who would never have sat down and spoke, Ian Paisley, people who were vehemently opposed to each other ideologically and religiously and everything. Eventually they had to actually sit down and say, I'm listening, you talk, and now I'll talk, and come into a consensus. And that's the only way it's going to, any peace is going to come.
Mary, this will not be kumbaya and a handshake on the beautiful manicured lawn on the White House, and everybody's jubilating because two enemies can shake their hands. That ain't going to be enough. Nobody wants
Yeah.
to shake hands. That's the easy part. Is how to build peace by a piece of a time. Listening. It will be many setbacks, but listening what the other side wants, and be able to go and understand the dialogue. The problem what I see nowadays, there is no dialogue. They're just statements, monologues. Even in my office, people, actually, one person told me about several weeks ago, "You dirty Jews are messing the situation up." There was a young woman, mid-20s, not bad looking, to put in the right. Out of her mouth comes the most absolutely super of anti-Semitic
Hate.
remarks. That is still there, and will transmit it
Oh,
from person to generation to generation.
it
Now it
is.
will be destroyed. It will be destroyed, Mary. And we will make inroads into peace when people have the courage to listen to each other. It doesn't take courage to hate, but the courage to say, I am neither on this side or on the other side. I want to understand what your grievances are. No, South Africa is not necessarily the example, but is a example how we can do truth and reconciliation committees, how we can at least come to some form of justice. Because people hanging on the trees, they don't contribute to justice.
Mm.
And it takes a lot of courage to do that. And always will be setbacks. But in this world where we're not only threatened by climate change and violence, in this world we still have one dominant organ that we can be used. It's the brain. And start talking and understanding.
And start listening.
And listen and stop and start listening. Cotton out of your ears, put it in the mouth and listen. There I'm
But you have to be, people listen, but they never hear, Bernd. And and there is a big difference between somebody just listening while somebody is talking, but they're not internalizing anything, or they're not taking it seriously, or they're not believing it, or they're just basically sounding boards half the time. With listening, you've got to hear. You've got to hear what another person is suffering. I mean, I have friends from all walks of life. My best friend, her husband's Muslim. He's Libyan. I've known him for as long, well, not as long. I know her since I was 4, and she's Irish, and you wouldn't meet a nicer, people, and more generous and everything like that. And then my father's side of the family were Protestant. My mother's side were Catholic. My father was English. My mother was Irish. And they even had opposite. They even supported opposite political parties here in Ireland. But what my dad did, which was great, was he switched off. He actually didn't listen to her half the time, and she never. They didn't hold grudges. And I think the important thing is not to hold grudges, to listen to people, and to accept that people have different views. And they're always going to have different views, and they're
if they're not getting if they're not extreme,
as long as they're not extreme.
But I can tell you, if it would be easy to counter anti-Semitism, it would be easy. The problem is people seek the path of conflict because it's easier to do. Now,
it's much easier.
I'm often asked, and you got is where after the presentation said, why are you doing this, and why we need to look for reconciliation with Jews. Some of these groups are non-Jewish, or if you just kill everybody, then the situation would be much better. I said violence does never resolve the problem. In violent killing each other never resolves the problem. It brings much more resentment. But unfortunately, we have a situation now when the majority of neo-Nazi propaganda, American Jews often ask me, so what's happening in Germany with neo-Nazis? Well, you ask about neo-Nazis in Germany, you can get a bunch of you right around the corner. When here, specifically in South Florida, the center of the logistic of the neo-Nazi movement is here in the United States.
Yeah.
In the United States.
It's frightening to think
this is something that comes from the deep bottom, either negating the fact that there was Nazi parties or either in the United States, or trying to forget. Coming back to Auschwitz and the horrific trials that were undertaken, and people were abused medically by Dr. Mengele, for example.
Yeah.
this is something that unfortunately happened in the United States prior to the Second World War. It's called eugenics. It
Yeah.
was very popular, which a brutally simple sentence: get rid of those who are not worthwhile. So
Action.
that was done in the United States and also in other places of the world. We need to be honestly looking at the facts and said, look, if you have 24/7 be a politician and you can make influence of that, fine. But if you're working poor or work every day to make a living, where do you take the time to make an impact on anti-hate movement? It's very simple.
It's not.
If you in workplace talk to each other, or in a coffee shop. I have a coffee shop around the corner. It doesn't belong to me. Whenever there's Ramadan, mostly Pakistanis work there. I said, Ramadan Mubarak. And he said, you know Ramadan? I said, yes, but you're a Jew? No, I'm worse. I'm an Israeli. He said, oh,
Yeah.
thank you. They don't even, they were looking around, Ramadan. Said, I just want to express my appreciation for your holiday. And one of them, a Pakistani girl, looked at me and said, I know you're doing soon, it's a holiday, that is, it's the New Year. What do they do with the New Year's? It's like with other interests. Open up the mind.
Yeah.
Simple
Exactly.
words of kindness. Simple words
Yeah.
of kindness. I'm
Yeah.
not naive. Absolutely not. But in my opinion, against all odds, is possible. People can change, and people have the courage. There was one outstanding woman that I met in Bamberg in 1984. I was doing final works on a presentation about the fate of Jews in Bamberg. And I came across a German peasant woman living in a small village outside Bamberg. And I was told this is her and a mother and a grandmother were a generation of maids working for a Jewish family. When the Jewish family brought into the holding quarters or before they in downtown, that's bad place as it can be, and then we just poured it to Theresienstadt prior after that. This landlady came every day with a basket full of fruits, eggs, bread, and butter, and sneaked it in. And asked it, and I told her, look, there would have been death on sight. They would have executed you. She looked at me, but that is what good Catholics should do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's simple expressions, having a courage to do something which is right.
Yeah.
And I'm getting so combative lately because we have now as mainstream, we have neo-Nazis. They're coming out. Jews will not replace us. Demonstrating in Pittsburgh, 18 Jews killed in a synagogue here, attack
That's
on
right.
Jews.
Yeah.
If we let it happen again, not on my watch, definitely not on my
Nor
watch.
mine. And it's not so long ago, Bernd.
I will continue to be a doctor. I will continue to. That's what I do for
I think you're going to
35
get a
years.
few more patients, because one particular woman, when she saw my post, she said, "Oh my God, he's just down the road from me. He's 5 minutes from me. I'm leaving my own doctor and I'm going to him." Thank God
thank you
for
for
whatever
thank
kind
you,
of
but that was
insurance.
not,
Yes.
not my goal is in life.
No, I know.
When I spoke with the former chief rabbi of Israel, spoke with him about it, Rabbi Lau, in the shiur on an evening in Tel Aviv, and in front of others, he said, "You're from Germany? Mm-hmm. You know I was in the Holocaust?" I said, "Yes." How can a German become a Jew? I gave him a brief rundown and said, it takes not only an act of courage, but it takes the ability to listen. And what I learned as a sort of Holocaust survivor, and I'm being asked as an Orthodox rabbi, where was God in Auschwitz? He responded, and he told me the same thing. God was there, crying what his children were doing. Because God not necessarily gives you the blueprint and said, do it and you're good.
Just gives you
God gives you choices. The principles that you can abide to gives you choices to go either one direction or the other.
Free will.
Free will. And I'm afraid, he said, that people don't want to listen anymore and blame for whoever the third party or God. Even with God is here, there's nothing you can do. It's just a massacre. He brought it to bear that you have to make an effort as a Jew in a Jewish law to understand what God's or higher power, whatever you call will, wants to have to be done. We have the Talmud discussions, the Torah discussions, the reinterpretation, and so on. But most importantly, that you are mature enough to make your decision, and because this decision will form and shape your entire life. There is no God who makes you this for you. And I think that's hopeful if people look at the tradition more in a traditional way. and allow themselves not to recreate what is good for them, but what is good for the community. Because I am very, very concerned that people that have only two things in mind, vengeance, reactionary responses, violence, because they like to be anarchistic. That this is the danger. We have more weapons in the United States than people living in the United States. We have people that it seems 17-year-old runs on the street with a military rifle, shooting people, and the police is not doing anything. White against black. We have the very, very aggressive languages that are being used. Anti-Semitism is out of the bag too. The absolutely inability to be empathizing with another person, threatening each other. And I said, look, here's my office. We talk in my office. We don't threaten anybody. If you're in the business of threatening something, get the heck out of it. But that's not everybody can say. And it's, for me, this will be a litmus test. What's going to happen with American democracy? We had already one attack on January the 6th, 2021, when an active attempt to overthrow a legitimate government was undertaken. It was a coup d'etat. This was not a peaceful gathering of people. This was a coup d'etat, an attack on the pillars of democracy, and people died. And this happens, and people don't do anything. Thanks to God, we still have laws on the book. But if this is happening over and over again, people will eventually say, look, I want to be with the strong guys, not with these talkers in the parliament. I want to be like them.
Yeah.
That's the danger.
Yeah.
And people like you and me and many others will be in the minority. Therefore, you have to have the strength and the courage to say, whenever there's an outlet to declare your affirmation, it's not about being Judophilic or pro-Jews and pro-Israel. It's about to understand that the only way to maintain a humanity is to stand up for the right thing. And I don't stand up for people who won't call for murder. I don't call for people to stand up and chopping heads off, and nobody talks about it. We need to finally come to a conclusion: we either die together or we live together.
We live together,
but not both. Not both at the
no,
same
you
time.
can't. You can't. Bernd, it was. I've been calling you Bernd now, and I probably should have been calling you Doctor Wollschlaeger. I practiced your name so many times, so I didn't make a mistake. But I think Wollschlaeger. And I listened to you saying it, and I said, "Yeah, that's the way. I'm correct." The last thing I wanted was to get your name incorrectly. See, it's interesting that despite the fact your father didn't want you to use the name, you did still hold on to it.
I was asked this question many times, and the answer is, Germans are not Nazis. German means not that is the Nazis. That's the language of murder. My father was a Nazi. But I choose, in opposition and despite, I choose to keep my name alive for the children that are born Jewish. And I have three wonderful children. They're Jewish, and their name is Wollschlaeger. That is in town. We don't hide anymore. We just want to demonstrate that people can change and make an honest effort to help. And I'm in that respect, we have to continue doing it. It doesn't have to be with weapons. It doesn't have to be with violence and war. It ain't going to happen after
it can be with peace.
After the second Intifada, after the peace deal on the White House lawn signed by Yitzhak Rabin, and Shimon Peres and Yasser Arafat, turned into a hell a few years later because one side didn't get what the other side wanted. There's no compromise, and it exploded into a bloodbath of thousands. 2,300 Israelis killed, bombs in the cities of Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Yerushalayim. This is not peace. Peace must come from the bottom up, from the individuals to be able to.
Peace must come from within. Peace must.
Otherwise, you will be doomed. You'll be doomed. And we have too much violence already to deal with. And we have to ask our question: do we want to continue living that? Because that's not human.
No.
That's not something that we should, that makes us sick, that makes us not what we can do. Our potential will not be raised. I don't know what will happen, but I'm getting, unfortunately, a little more antsy when I hear about anti-Semitism, and I see people that, like in my car is an Israeli flag and in the windshield. One guy came, whose Jew car is that I just banged? I said, a Jew car? Yeah, that was probably mine. Well, when you come out, I will tell you what. And, just a border bubble. I said, look, don't do it. We can peacefully settle that. But first of all, I'm not a Jew car. So this is when you use just a
Yeah,
term,
it's a
dehumanizing
dehumanizing
people.
terminology, and it goes back, I suppose, to when you think of which is very current at the moment in the United States, the Art Spiegelman's mouse, and what and it being banned in a certain school in America because they thought there was naked bodies in it. I mean, if they want to kind of sanitize the Holocaust, it's not going to happen. Art Spiegelman wrote that book, and he dehumanized the characters to represent the way the Nazis would have seen them, as vermin with the Jews, Poles as pigs, French as frogs. And that's why he did that cartoon. And it's he did it that way that any age group could be brought into the Holocaust to get some idea of what was going on, and then ask their parents or ask their teachers to explain. But it was all about, the characters were all used in a dehumanizing way to represent how his father would have been seen. And for them to actually ban that is just, it's
Well,
just,
Mary, there was
to me, it's anti-Semitic.
burnings in the Nazi dictatorship in the street. Books of Kästner and other German authors were burned on the street. Well, you're not in book burning yet because we make it very easy. We just take these books and just under lock and key, and only a special request you can rent it. This is crazy. This is a reattachment, afraid to be criticized. I'm neither on either side. I mean, I don't talk about politics and right and left and party, whatever. But if you're unable to allow others to read something, that means you're so insecure about who you are, so insecure about what your ideology is about.
Yeah.
And I learned that, for example, in East Germany, I was since I have to come out with it. I was trade union representatives and build trade unions and work with trade unions in Germany, in Israel, and in the United States. We had the privilege to contribute to the creation of the largest physicians union in the United States. I'm a lefty, always was.
I'm
But
middle. I'm middle.
but my point is, if regardless where you come from, you can make a difference. And the difference is what is good for us and what is good for our benefit, and not to exclude others. And that is extremely important, that we work together and sit together, because otherwise it will not work out.
I used to think I was left.
Well, I can tell you one
Really
thing.
left, but I find the older I'm getting, I'm right down the center. I can see positives and negatives in both
I'm mentioning
sides.
that, Mary, because I remember very vividly when we were creating the largest doctors union in the United States, we had to change laws. We had to, in our state, we had to remove trainees as students, but as fully employed and employed members of the team, because they get a salary. And we were able to talk to people from different colors, from the left, from the right, from the middle, and they said, can you help us to change law? We were creating a complete new system that in the end worked very well. Nowadays, you cannot even discuss this. Nowadays,
no, this is what I'm scared about, is all this banning of people and stopping people from speaking. You know, you don't have to like what somebody says, but for goodness sake, you do have to listen, because when they listen to you, they might just change their mind about, they might be
it might affect you in the wrong way. Well, I can tell you, Mary, the challenges that we need to not go to either side, but we need to start in the dialogue and talk to people, because you don't make peace with your friends. You make peace with the enemy.
No. There's nothing worse than people preaching to the choir, as they say. You need to be in dialogue with people who don't agree with you as well. And you need to say, well, I don't agree with you, and this is why I don't agree with you.
I was, for example, in East Berlin several times, in then communist East Germany. And I remember my last trip in summer of 1986, beautiful summer day in Alexanderplatz. Was the showcase of the communist regime, a huge
I saw
TV
Alexander
tower,
Platz.
and with a rotating restaurant. I mean, state of the art. And I remember we were on in a guided group up there. The presenter was a minder from the government, showed us a map. There was imprinted on this part of the map was Berlin, and the other one was blank. I said, wait a second, we're looking for West Berlin and East Berlin, and one is active and bubbly. And what are they? They're the entity. What was that? The entity. Well, wait a second. This is Berlin, and this is what? It's the entity. It doesn't exist. Absolute communists and Nazi National Socialist extremes have one thing in common. They deny the reality. They have solution in the search of a problem. Whereas those in the other side, in between, left or right, but in between, said, we identified problems, we need to find a solution in order to move forward in every sake. But what people nowadays do, they have an agenda that is not to be discussed anymore, an agenda that they want to push out, and then sell it to us as what we need to do. This is the wrong approach to addressing the complex but not complicated world. And if people, regardless of what color, come together and able to talk and listen and talk, then there's hope. If there's not, it's not be able.
You know, I was nervous when I started this interview. I was saying to myself, yeah, I had waited so long I tried so long to try and get you, and eventually cold called you. I didn't actually realize, by the way, that it was your mobile phone or your cell phone that I was going to be ringing. I thought it was an office, and I was taken aback when you answered. And but I was just I was saying, you're the first person I have interviewed. I've interviewed many survivors and their children, but you're the first person with your totally unique story of straddling both sides of the experience, if you like, of what it was like to be the son of a perpetrator, and now being one of the people that your father would have persecuted. And it would have been interesting to have seen if you had been a few years younger, if you had been born, good lot younger during the war, what would have been his reactions altogether. But Bernd, it was an absolute, I could have spoken to you and listened to you forever, honest to God. I feel like I've known you all my life.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you for coming on, and please God, you'll come on again sometime.
Sure, I would be happy. I'm working on different projects, not only about me, but one of the projects is, how is this possible in the United States after the war? Thousands of Nazis came here to live, and nobody said a word. And
no, but they did that. They did that, Bernd, here in Ireland. Here in Ireland, around the time of the war, you had Otto Scarseni, you had Peter Menton, Albert Folens, Celestine Lane, and Artukovic, people like that. All of them Nazis were given safe havens in this country, and yet 400 Jewish children were turned around on their trying to come into the country and were sent back. And
well, I met a former astronaut, Ed Mitchell, who's dead unfortunately, in a meeting in South Florida, and I asked him a question and said, you're a lunar lander commander in Apollo 12. You must have worked very closely with the German engineers that made it all happen. Were you no concern to deal with Nazis? No, come on, Nazis. We're all good boys. They work together. The time is over to talk about that. It was never. Unfortunately, Werner von Braun, the father of the V1 and V2 rockets, was an SS lieutenant colonel equivalent voluntarily. He supervised the underground slave labor factories which constructed the V1 and V2, where more people died in producing these weapons than using these weapons against the civilian population in England. So if that last be swiped under the nothing, the means justify anything. The end goal is important, and what means you choose is nothing. You need to just push through. And I asked myself, how can it be that the United States, because they adored him and his team as the rocket angels and they could make anything happen, which they did, and then completely ignoring the past? I mean, somebody's lieutenant colonel of the SS, for crying out loud. Oh, what was the explanation that I once heard? Well, he just automatically was enrolled in kind of like a credit card deduction, automatic minimum payment. He didn't even know what was going on. Yes, he knew. He was supervising the slave worker camps
They
underground.
all knew. They all
I
knew.
mean, so if you stop denying reality, then there's a chance. But if you deny reality and you're entitled to your opinion, but not to your own
To your
facts
truth.
and
Yeah.
your truth. And
That's another phrase that really gets to me lately is my truth. There is only the truth and lies,
correct.
and there's no such thing as my truth and your truth and someone else's truth. That's my opinion or my view or the view I want to actually portray or impress on somebody. But there's not this new phrase that's gone into the lexicon of this is my truth. You know, irritates me so much.
Makes communication almost impossible.
Totally impossible. But thank you again, Bernd, and Shindera Lesh an Clár. That's the end of the show for today. Until the next time, Lacuna Day. But Wallam Tugalir Chiacana, Sonus, Agus Gra. I wish you peace, happiness, and love. Agus Gadesh Shalom.
Shalom, Laila Tov.